It is just after midnight. The torpedo strikes the merchant right below the waterline. Below deck, the shocked sailors desperately scramble up the ladders, running for the lifeboats. But some are not so lucky. Behind bent machinery, one young engineer is trapped at his station. Knowing that they can't get him out in time, his mates give him one last handshake and promise to visit his wife and children back at home. Then they must leave before the cold sea swallows them all. I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II special episode about life on a merchant ship during the Second World War. In between the wars, merchant seamen had a pretty bad reputation. They were not seen as romantic adventurers or daring seafarers, but as vagrants, troublemakers, and drifters. Britain fielded the world's largest merchant navy, with more than 4,000 ocean-going ships. Flying the red ensign, they carried 50% of the world's imports and exports, with an average of 2,500 British merchant ships active at sea at all times. The job was tough, and the pay was poor, and everyone took their existence for granted. The outbreak of the Second World War changes that perception rather quickly. Now Britain needs all those liners, steamers, and tankers on the thin gray lines more than ever. Scattered around the globe on the oceanic trading routes, these cargo ships are called upon to keep Britain not only in the fight, but simply alive. Without them, the island nation would face starvation. Of course, this paints a large target on the backs of those cargo ships, and enemy submarines, torpedo boats, and shore-based bombers come after them hard. And before the Army and the Royal Air Force, it is actually the crew of a cargo liner that become the first British casualties of World War II. As the Athenia is torpedoed off the west coast of Ireland, September 3rd, 1939, it dawns on many how dangerous this job may become. And signing on with a British merchant ship in 1940 and 41 is an extremely hazardous endeavor. 770 ships and more are sunk in this time, and over 16,600 sailors are either killed, taken prisoner, or missing at sea. That is a crew casualty rate of nearly 50%. Not surprisingly, the Royal Navy and the Merchant Marine grow increasingly desperate looking for crew replacements. It doesn't help that the newspapers are full of article after article about torpedoed ships and Hitler's growing U-boat menace. And there's always someone in a sailor's pub who tells a story of how a ship sank with all hands on deck, or how Bill from the shipyard was found on a piece of wreckage after drifting aimlessly for 20 days, or whatever. So who would volunteer for such a job? Well, reasons for that vary. Many simply do it because that's how they pay their bills and provide for their families. And the money now is comparatively good. A simple galley boy can make £4 a month and an additional £10 as wartime compensation. This danger money is one of the main incentives to join up. The salary is 40% paid by the ship owner and 60% paid as war risk money by the Ministry of Shipping. The pay for a veteran sailor can be more than £22 a month. For others who join, it's just the job they always wanted, tied to their desire to see the world and experience what lies beyond the horizon. Sure, there's a war going on, but that adds to the excitement. And besides the increased pay, sailors have everything provided for them by the shipping company. Food, clothing, accommodation. The crew pays for nothing and is only responsible for the care and cleanliness of their ship and their equipment. A few certainly hope to escape the active war this way. By joining up with the Merchant Marine, they dodge the draft into the armed forces. Sailors usually sign on for a journey of 3 to 6 months and then enjoy 30 days off before signing on again. That is still a pretty long time, even without the added danger of maybe being torpedoed hundreds of miles from shore. Now, in the best case scenario, the crew of a merchant ship resembles an open society. Besides the obvious professional hierarchy, there are no further distinctions between class, age, or race. Sailors of many different nationalities, ethnicities, and religions must work together to keep the ship afloat and see its cargo delivered. Indeed, the crew of a foreign-going merchant ship can be quite diverse. The merchant navy is open from the ages of 14 to 70. and it is not uncommon for captains to pick up additional crew members from foreign harbors. A large number of sailors serving on British ships come from the Commonwealth, and many are Asians and Africans. Privacy is very limited. Each room is just as big as it needs to be, which means the crew will constantly be on each other's toes. The communal bathrooms and small living quarters leave barely any room for personal space. If sailors feel slighted or hold grudges towards each other, it will lead to confrontations. Fistfights and brawls after being confined for months on the high seas are not uncommon, but these grudges need to be resolved quickly. Each ship depends on its sailors to cooperate with each other, so it is vital that the crew members know each other, their habits, and their character. The smaller the ship, the more tightly the crew needs to be knit. From the captain to his officers, to the engineers, stockers, carpenters, donkey men, deckhands, and cabin boys, they all need to coordinate their work to keep the ship going. Discipline must be upheld and can be pretty harsh. Written and unwritten rules are followed or a sailor is punished. Quarrelers spend days peeling an endless stream of potatoes in the kitchen. Speaking of food, meals on board are another roll of the dice. Food can be monotonous aboard merchant ships. Not every steamer carrying a load of heating oil or coal is outfitted with a 5-star cook. Sailors make do with what food is available. The mess deck might serve the same stale bread and butter menu each morning, maybe with some ham or cold supper, some porridge, or at least a hot mug of tea. Usually, the rations rotate somewhat between variations of sausages, potatoes, and cabbage, with the occasional pudding or eggs. Conditions do improve after May 1941, when the British Parliament passes the Emergency Work Order. With the Ministry of War Transport and the Board of Trade running things, the salaries and rations become more standardized. The official regulations state that each sailor is to receive 1 pound of meat, 1 pound of potatoes, and 1 pound of bread per day. Additionally, they should be issued 3 ounces of tea and coffee per week and supplied with pickles and eggs for breakfast. Under wartime conditions, this is pretty decent. But the men need those calories, as a typical day on a merchant ship alternates between the regular duties, additional duties, and only a couple hours of leisure time. Although modern ships are driven by the power of machines, it is still important for the sailors to be physically fit. Men exercise on deck, running around the ship or lifting buckets up from the sea. This is also a way to tire the men out before hitting the bunks, and it relieves them of their stress. But even experienced sailors simply cannot take it any longer. The constant danger, maybe the news that they're stuck somewhere and can't spend Christmas back at home. Maybe they panic during a bad storm or when the engines suddenly stop working in the middle of the ocean. Stress increases many times when reports of enemy activity come in. The Germans deploy acoustic mines and G7 torpedoes that can tear an armored battleship apart. So a largely unprotected merchant does not stand the ghost of a chance against such weaponry. Some sink in less than half an hour. In that case, the men working in the bowels of the ship, the engineers, the greasers, the firemen, they have very little time to save themselves. Those who are not outright killed by the detonation might suffer from severe burns or just be dragged out into the cold sea. Tankers loaded with high-octane fuel, cargo ships carrying explosives, they are themselves ticking time bombs. 1 torpedo is enough to turn them into a death trap with very low odds of survival. So it's understandable that all of this takes a high toll on the psyche of the sailors. Nighttime is especially demanding, as the men keep to a strict shift system to keep watch for mines and other dangers. But standing guard or working on the decks during the cold and damp nights is rough. Being exposed to the harsh Atlantic winters is no joke, and the decks are wet and slippery. Convoys moving during the night with lights out and total radio silence. They're at the mercy of the convoy's commander. If he fails in his job, then a row of merchant ships might fall victim to the dangerous winds around the Pacific Islands or hit an iceberg in the freezing North Atlantic. Enemy submarines prefer attacking in the darkness, as we know. And not every merchantman is outfitted with good radar. Even inside a convoy, the ships are never truly safe. On the most dangerous routes, sailors wake to sudden flashes of explosions and desperate screams, and the next morning, there is a gap in the convoy. And when a ship goes down, so do the personal belongings of a sailor. His documents, his photos, his valuables, and adding insult to injury, it is a common practice among ship companies that the pay for sailors stops the day the ship is sunk. Survivors who might spend days or weeks in lifeboats before being rescued only have their pay resumed after they report back to the office at home. Okay, this episode focuses on the British, but the sailor's experience, his basic experience, is fairly universal. That's the main reason why crew members could come from all quarters of the world and work together without even speaking much of the same language. Yet at the same time, depending on cargo, destination, and route, each trip might be fairly unique, especially during wartime. Some are lucky, others are not. For the high seas these days are a dangerous, dangerous place. And those men from a variety of nations who brave the danger to supply their people and their armies are very much unsung heroes of the war. If you want to see a special we did about a German commerce raider, a ship that preyed on merchant ships, you can click right here for our special on the Cormoran and join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com to get more of these specials and more regular episodes and more everything. See you next time.